As it's the slot before lunch, I thought I'd just give you a little anecdote. There's nothing to do with any of this at all. But the gentleman that was mentioning borders and edges and better for biodiversity. And so this has nothing to do with anything. But many years ago, I was, for various reasons, catching hoverflies in a tropical forest in Western Kenya. And in that forest area, it's where you have grassland and forest. And you get the most number of butterflies, hoverflies, snakes, etc. because of that border. So you've got the grassland species and the forest species coming together. But there we were tripping along with a net catching hoverflies, doing sort of this in a Victorian way. But unfortunately, it's also where the pit vipers are most likely to occur. And they're very thick snakes, and they just lie there. And your main survival strategy was that their reactions are quite slow. And therefore, if you saw them and reacted, you could get away before they bit you. And they cause, I think, the most deaths in Africa from snake bite. Anyway, that was just biodiversity at edges. So,
did you lose colleagues?
No, but there were quite a few villages. Anyway, right. So, sustainable products. Now, as Martin said, he didn't know what I was going to say, and I struggled with this actually, surprisingly, because I've been doing this for 10 years, and I know all sorts about lots of things, but the more I know, the less I know. You know, I've arrived at that point where quite often now I go away from meetings and events thinking, I don't know anything about any of that. And it's because I don't necessarily understand things, but it's also because we've got used to using a whole set of words as shorthand. And in construction, obviously, there are many different groups of people, and often they don't have any interfaces or edges. And we all use these shorthand words, not just jargon, but actually shorthand for something that probably those of us in our peer group have a sense of understanding of what that means. But actually, I'm a bit of a literal person, so if you look at that, you go, well, what does that mean, actually? It's like one of my favourites at the moment is when people talk about supply chain. I've decided I've no idea what they mean, and I have to ask them what they mean. So the same thing for this topic. It was kind of, well, let me just say something about CPA and therefore why we're where we are. We're the umbrella body for all construction product manufacturers and distributors in the UK. So we represent 86% of manufacturers. And something like 78% of the materials used in construction in the UK are manufactured in the UK. So it's not all made in China and brought over here. So we're the umbrella body. We have lots of trade associations that are members. We have those who make what we call stuff, and we have those who make things from the stuff that the others make. So we represent concrete, cement, steel, ceramics, timber, etc. We do not, as some campaigners seem to think, represent the dark side. We're product neutral and material neutral. So, and what we do a lot of is economic forecasting. So we have a very respected economics team, and they are working doing standard surveys, which they've been doing for over a decade or more, and they're looking at what is actually happening in construction. They're forecasting what government policies or mayors' announcements of hundreds of thousands of houses might actually mean, but they're then also surveying the product manufacturers for how much of that is actually coming through to actual sales. And of course, our economist is incredibly cynical, because so much is said that will happen that never happens. So we do a lot of that. So for instance, here's the private housing starts since 2014 to, these two are now scenarios, because obviously Brexit has introduced a whole different ball game. So those are the estimates. And the reason we do this is because construction product manufacturers need to know, do they need to open 3 more factories if they want to capture the market trend? Do they need to close some factories? If they're particularly innovative, do they want to be first in the marketplace? Do they want to be a bit behind, in which case they want to see the front ones crash and burn? That type of thing. So it's important. The Green Deal meant that some manufacturing sectors decided this was it, they were going for it, they got very burnt. So they're not going to do that again. We do a lot of technical activities, construction products regulation, which is a regulation. Somebody mentioned earlier directives. We need to be slightly clear. A regulation in the EU is something that applies across the EU as law. If it's a directive, it is transposed into the national legislation of member states. So if it is, I hear a lot of people saying directives will be affected by Brexit. Not necessarily, because we already have our national law that we are likely to keep, if not just for the fact that it's the easiest thing to do. And one must really make that distinction. It's very important. We've been a lot involved with building regulations, the Bomfield Energy Review, whenever it's coming out. The Bomfield Property Flood Resilience Action Plan. And this again is important. These people are interested in these properties that are being flooded, and the insurance pays for the same stuff that was there to go back in. So that's probably not a good idea if they're going to be flooded every 3 years. So this is looking at how can we refurbish using different products. And then obviously we're hugely involved with digitalisation of product information and BIM. And these issues on sustainability are what I deal with, which is more at the manufacturing stage, which is measuring and reporting of sustainability performance, which I'll come on to, responsible sourcing issues, waste reduction, resource efficiency, it's now all circular economy is the fashion thing, water, climate and energy, obviously, and biodiversity. So that's why we were contacted. And it was one of those cases of BRE's comms people approached our comms people. It wasn't quite Clinton and Trump, but, you know, it was kind of that sort of thing. And so I ended up some way down the line of this request of, could I come and speak about what I was told was the case for choosing sustainable products and materials. And I thought, well, what does that mean? You know, and then a bit later on, our comms team advertised the BRE event, because that's the deal, and they put in the word business case for sustainable products. And I thought, well, yeah, okay. So I would ring BRE up several times. I emailed Martin, I contacted Damon, I said, what's the story you're telling here today? What is it, where does it fit in? What's the story you want on products? And everyone had a different answer, of course. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with this. It's an international development issue of it's how a project management goes wrong because different people are talking to each other and they don't quite know what each means. It's this is a child's swing on a tree. Oh gosh, sorry. It's an interactive. Am I going properly? Interactive. So it's what was proposed by the project sponsor and what was then specified in the project, and then what was designed, what was produced by the programmers, what was installed, and then what the actual user wanted. And I think it works in virtually all of life's situations, actually. And it's to do with miscommunication, misunderstanding, differing values, and all sorts of things. And it's very applicable for construction because of all these different groups of people. So anyway, going back to what was I supposed to talk about? So, as I say, I'm very literal. So it said case for choosing sustainable products and materials. And I thought, well, that's the answer. That's the answer. It's the planet and it's the people. So, but surely, and I had no idea what this audience would be. So we all know that, don't we? So those are the challenges. And somebody earlier said, you know, with too much emphasis on the business case, and actually it's the moral, it's the ethical case. It's how we do create sustainable homes, communities, etc. What makes places good to live in, or countries good to live in. So that surely is the case for it. So that I thought, well, that's the answer then. What do I say then? So, and those are the challenges which everyone's mentioned today, the climate change, the energy security. Nobody's mentioned water, I don't think. Water availability and the water security, resource competition, material security. People get a bit hung up on that, actually. I have to keep telling people clay is not scarce. But again, loose thinking, lazy thinking. Nice to hear biodiversity being mentioned a lot more, both in terms of preventing loss but enhancing it. And of course, we're getting much more now back into the human rights and the rise of modern slavery and these issues. And obviously the UK Modern Slavery Act has really brought it into the fact that we have it here. It's not something that happened a long while ago or only happens in Dubai or wherever. It's actually all around us, and we need to be aware of that. And this whole issue of workers' rights, fair payments, fair contracts, 0 hours contracts, what's the big issue with that chap and his sports firm, all of that. Sports Direct, thank you. And then obviously health and safety is always with us. So those are the challenges. And why does it do this? Okay, so I thought, well, it can't be about that because it's not the right audience for that. So I thought, well, okay, maybe whoever wrote the title for my talk, who I never found out who that was actually, maybe what they meant was, oh, could you come along with a list of sustainable products? Because we at CPA get regularly contacted, about twice a month, for could we email people a list of sustainable products? And I kind of go, again, I go like this. And sometimes if you kind of shrug, people think, well, you don't know. And, and it's just that they need to talk to somebody else who does know. And it is, as you all realise, it's like saying, well, could you send us a list of the best music? It depends. It depends on context. It depends what you're trying to achieve. It depends what your priorities are. It depends what your values are. So, your list of sustainable products varies enormously. And I was at a different event yesterday, and there was a person to my left who wrote sustainable products on one of those little post-its. And she was very adamant that she knew what it was. And as she was in marketing, I thought I'd ask her. And I said, oh, what is it then? And she said, well, it's a low carbon product, obviously. At which point, the person to my right said, no, it isn't. It's to do with local craftsmanship and local sourcing. And of course, depending on who we're talking to, it might be a low carbon product. But again, often they don't think, well, do they mean at the factory gate or in the over the life of the building, or what do they mean? Or quite a few, and it's becoming more prevalent, are talking about local sourcing and local labour and that type of thing. Others, they mean, could you send us a list of what captures renewable energy? So I think one of the distributors did quite a catalogue a few years ago of ground source heat pumps and solar and all of that kind of thing. And then for those of you who remember RAP working in construction, in their first iteration, everything to the point of mantra was recycled content. And recycled content was equivalent to sustainability and everything. It was the answer to the world's problems. Obviously, energy efficiency, huge issue all the time. Quite a few people think that it must only be natural, renewable resources, so that we would all have our own hazelwood, and we would kind of knit our own house, which is lovely, and it is the subsistence concept of ecology, of sustainable living, etc. And it would be fine if there weren't so many of us. And I'm not going to choose which, certainly in this country, which sort of 30 million we'd get rid of, or across the planet, which, I don't know, 4 billion. So that's great, but we live in the world we live in. And then obviously water, ethical sourcing. And now, of course, with circular economy, everyone's saying, well, okay, circular economy is really another word for carbon, and and then also maybe it's responsible living. So all of these values change. They change over time. They change with context. They change depending on what your background is, how old you are probably. For some of us, we remember when acid rain was the biggest thing around. So we have all those things that basically are responding to those challenges that is why we're doing things. And so we've got all this stuff, and a lot of manufacturers are very aware of all of this. I don't know why it goes forward 2 every time I do it. And so if there's all these different characteristics and different things that people find important, is there a way, do we have a methodology for looking at the range of these indicators and assessing what the impact is on each of these? And of course, many of you are incredibly familiar, I realise. We do. It's called a life cycle assessment. And strangely, within the construction product sector, we've been doing it for 20 years. And the reason we have is because of BRE. And so I think it's 20-year anniversary either this year or last year. So life cycle assessment is an extremely mature methodology within our sector for looking at environmental impact, and it was driven by the BRE Green Guide and the ratings, excuse me, that would produce in eco homes, the early iteration of the Code for Sustainable Homes, and in the rest of the BREEAM family. And that methodology produces an environmental profile, which in this day and age we call an environmental product declaration. And for reasons of construction products being part of the single European market, and that is a construction products regulation, so it will be impacted by Brexit. And in our sector, we are not going, hooray! We'd all like to do our own standards now. That is not what the industry wants at all. So we now have it, I'll use the word harmonised, at the European level. So we have a standard European methodology for measuring impact. And that standardised, consistent set of data, and it is data, is what will be digitised as environmental impact. That's what will go into digitisation and available for BIM. And so that measuring environmental impact is a fairly mature landscape, and we have a similar maturity, although constantly changing, for responsible and ethical sourcing as well. And those environmental impact and responsible sourcing are what gets mentioned in the BREEAM family, in the Home Quality Mark. It was what was used for the Olympics and the Code for Sustainable Homes. And we miss that structure of those things. For those of you who remember the Green Guide, and those were the issues it dealt with, I miss the Green Guide, I've decided. I do miss it. It had a simplicity that was able to communicate between the different groups in construction, which an EPD does not. An EPD is a set of data, and we're finding a lot of contractors are asking manufacturers, do you have 14001? Do you have a responsible sourcing certification? Do you have an EPD? Tick. And it goes in the filing cabinet. And we go, well, your EPD might say it'll destroy the planet in 14 days. So just because you've got one doesn't mean that's a good thing. It's not an organic certification. So that was the Green Guide. Here are the characteristics that the European EPD has, and that will also soon be amended to include end-of-life scenarios. And this is the standardised construction life cycle stages that the impact is measured across, and it's a straightforward structure that's good to use. So I won't go into responsible sourcing. This is a very sensitive thing. So that's how, yeah, we do have a list of issues that we measure. It's quite mature. It responds to the societal challenges, and that's what manufacturers invest and innovate against. So they're looking at how they can deliver performance in these areas, and that will vary with the sector, with the material group, with the product group, with whether it's big companies or little companies, and it's a huge variety. I mean, we probably represent about 30,000 companies, about, I don't know, 400,000 products or whatever. So we can't produce a list of sustainable products. So people are investing and innovating for that. There are issues to do with skilled labour force. The average age in our sector is going enormously high. And a huge amount of work on digitalisation, which will also need skill. So that's what manufacturers are doing, and they've been doing that for quite a while now. But what's beginning to happen? If they have an EPD done, it's about £25,000 to £30,000. If you have a responsible sourcing certification, it's £20,000 to £30,000. So they're assuming that doing that, investing, innovating, getting third-party verification, will give them advantage in the marketplace. And we are increasingly being told that they're not seeing it, to the extent that there's one company or sector for responsible sourcing which has had it for 5 years. They've never even been asked. So their 5 year, you recertificate after 5 years. So they're going, well, you know, we'll probably still carry on doing things, but should we bother to spend 30 grand on recertification? So if I read this title of my talk not as the case for choosing sustainable products, which is the moral and ethical one, but as the business case, then as a manufacturer, you survive or not as a business on your selling. And so it's demand, and how much of that demand you take, what market share you take. And that business case, it could be driven by regulation, but as we've all said, regulation less so. And quite often in this area, it's difficult to regulate. You need to be able, if to regulation, you need to be able to say that meets the regulation and that doesn't, and that's often quite difficult. So the government codes and strategies, we like the Code for Sustainable Homes very much. It gave forward-looking, it gave consistency, it used the standardised methodologies. It was something manufacturers were very, very sad to see go. Obviously, the business case is also, there are some internal efficiencies by pursuing the sustainability agenda. You get the brand image issue, you know, and we all think of Volkswagen in that one. Risk. And a lot of people, I think there's too much cynicism around. A lot of people want to do the right thing, actually. I remember one of our members saying, why does everyone think I want to pollute the local trout stream? So it's the business case that, and I think what we have to think about is that if one's asked the sustainable products, it's like I'm come to a meeting which is to do with, you know, happy people in their homes, and yet I'm being asked to say, how do the equivalent of the cells in your nerves and muscles and brain contribute to that? It's not just that there's a list of these things, and if you just buy those things, then you'll end up with the right performance. It's context, it's systems, it's what you're trying to achieve. So those are how you would work with, collaborate with manufacturers. I hear lots of verbs when I go to meetings of the supply chain, or people saying we're going to drive through the supply chain, or it's always an aggressive doing something to another person. It's never we will collaborate. And so I'll tell you what my key one thing is before you ask me, which is that talk to manufacturers and collaborate on the solutions for the problem that you're trying to resolve. So we're all looking for solutions, and that's where the manufacturer, if you talk to them early enough, can help with finding a solution. And they like that. They're men in sheds. They like to have a problem that they can solve. So in terms of just some pretty pictures, and finally, in terms of sustainable homes, that's the Bayleaf farmhouse in the Down and Wealdon Museum, it's 15th century. That's a museum piece. That's one just down the road from there that's still lived in by my mother-in-law. Not changed a lot since 15th century. Still got damp in the dining room, been there for 500 years. Again, the Victorian houses are all now coming up to about 150 years old. So, and they've been reused. The average occupancy of a house is, 14 years or 12 years or something. So they've been reused lots of times, as my colleague Dave Manley tells me. And then we are now seeing that, and again, if you think of systems solutions, which is where we all are, this is, I think what you mentioned, this is the Honda house in Davis, California, which is the, this is where they've created a home energy management system that links the solar to running the house, going in the battery storage, running your electric car, and putting back into the grid. I visited that a couple of years ago. This is your house. Well done. Although all of us who live in London took one look at that and went, "Oh, you could build another room on there."
Those terraces.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, does it? So without the space.
Yeah, there's an exhibition on the top floor.
Okay. All right. Yeah, because I live in Kew, and anyone with that would already have built space. And I have to say, given what I heard this morning, I live in one of the best places in the world. And this is the other game changer. It's the Specific House in Cardiff, which is supposedly going to be a zero, no, let me get this right, an energy positive house, and has got all sorts of new technologies in it that come in at a price that's within the housing association price. And I think with Bill's house and this house, we are into a new era of people have recognised the problems. They've recognised that you need a systems approach. They've all got different products that are providing a solution, a sustainable solution to the building, and that then has to fit within the community. So there's no excuses anymore, and let's just embrace the future.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.